Hello, everybody. My name is Rick Sterling, and I'm the president of Western IM. I'd like to thank you all for attending the webinar today about the migration capabilities of our Whisper tool. Since, as most of you know, this has been a series of webinars on the Whisper tool, I'd just like to do a quick recap. So the first webinar that some of you attended was about the physical information capabilities of Whisper and how it would enable a quick inventory of all your physical holdings, including that validation of what you already think is in all the boxes, even if that's not what's there. Then we did one on shared drive cleanup project, highlighting the Whisper capabilities that would enable that type of project, and some of the electronic capabilities give you a wider view of the tool. We followed that up with one on how Whisper could assist in the inventory of Microsoft SharePoint and all kinds of different other cloud locations like OneDrive and Google. And the most recent one actually was on classification and reorganization of the information that we kind of have spent all that time putting into the Whisper tool and organizing. So we saved this one today on migration as the end of the Whisper series. It's going to be a little bit different since migration is a really whole lot more complex and multifaceted topic. Those of you who have ever done a migration of anything electronic to anything else electronic are already cringing and having flashbacks to historical projects that you've been involved in the past. Whisper will help to calm the fears and those thoughts about the pain of migration, and the past projects sometimes brings all of that back to us. So for the technical people, Whisper is a modern architecture, really written in .NET, and it uses RESTful services, so it's quite a modern kind of internally written current system. Has an API for those of us that are really technical. It's fast and easy to use, and it's passive in nature, so it doesn't really negatively impact your users or your IT folks. Generally implemented as a SaaS, a software as a service solution, but could function on-prem if required in a particular organization. So that's for the technical people. So the first thing I'd like to say about migration today is that in our experience, migration projects always require some level of professional services. I've always indicated in past webinars that Whisper is an inexpensive tool, and the tool itself is just that. But migrations are always difficult and complex, and so professional services will make a really big difference and make them a whole lot smoother and more successful in the end, likely. Even if the services are only to assist in planning and migration and possible working as part of a migration team, it would be really advantageous to have some folks involved in that if you can. Now, I just wanted to give you a quick intro to my partner, Troy, who many of you know already from past webinars. Those of you who have attended those webinars will really know that Troy is the real technical guy in the Whisper side of the house. Troy, say hello.
Hey, hello everybody, and I look forward to kind of wrapping up what we've been working on the past few weeks.
Thanks, Troy. I'm looking forward to this one as well, Troy, this migration one personally. But first, I wanted to say just for a second. So you're all thinking there, I thought we were just inventorying the corporate information. And yes, Whisper is the right tool for that job. At this point, though, you've spent all kinds of time and effort, and your own teams have been involved, and also with subject matter experts in your organizations, and probably management, risk, security, legal, privacy, and IT, and all kinds of folks that are involved in all those things. And you are totally comfortable with the information you have inventoried and the classification you've applied based on the webinars we did previously. But now what? So we might want to just restructure the legacy SharePoint sites. Maybe that's what we want to do. Maybe that's the end goal. Or we might want to actually restructure the existing shared drive into a new format. Corporation maybe is thinking about using SharePoint, Documentum, Perceptive as a corporate solution or some other platform. And we want to move a clean subset of information that we've really worked long and hard to organize into the new solution, and not everything. We don't want to forklift everything in there if we don't have to. So we want to move maybe the information currently in a cloud location into a new platform. Or we might want to actually dispose of the electronic information that's past its retention, and hooray, we have a corporate sign-off to do that. Wouldn't that be a good thing? Lists really can be really endless, and maybe there's several of these projects that might apply to all of you. So Troy and I chose a few different scenarios that will outline the process and with the use of Whisper and all the hard work that you put in at this point based on what we've talked about in all the other webinars coming up to this. And those are really a shared drive restructure project. Everybody that I know usually has a shared drive around that isn't yet cleaned up or needs to be restructured. That's pretty consistent across the board. Most people have some SharePoint sites all over their corporations, and Whisper might be used to assist the real migrations to other platforms or repositories in the end. So just wanted to mention to all of you today that this list of scenarios could run for many slides. In this deck, we could use Whisper internally to do all kinds of projects. And we do in Western IM use Whisper internally to do virtually every project that we undertake. So part of what we're going to do today is give you a vision of some of those issues that occur while trying to do migrations and how Whisper might help you with that. And Troy will be able to do that for you. So Whisper is a passive tool. Just to mention that one more time, it has metadata only in it. So we only bring in metadata and not documents along the way. And that's really important for the security aspect of a lot of these projects. Your own teams will not have to worry so much. If they don't have access to documents, they can probably see the metadata because they need to do the project, but they will not be able to actually look at the documents in the corporate infrastructure. So it's really important to keep in mind, like we've always said, that this is a passive tool. So before I hand off to Troy, don't forget that you can ask questions in the Zoom application along the way. We'll try to get all the questions answered before the end of the webinar today, but if not, we'll reach out to you by email and get you answers for whatever you need to have answers to. Troy, you're on.
Thanks, Rick. Okay, here I'll just take over sharing my screen. There we go. Should be able to see my screen now. Okay, so what we'll start here, I believe most people have been in most of the past webinars, but we'll just take the first couple minutes here just to kind of reorient ourselves to what we're actually looking at in the Whisper application here. As we mentioned over the past, I guess 5 webinars now, 4, this is the 5th, we've done quite a bit of work on some shared drives, some physical information, some Google Drives, some OneDrive, some SharePoint sites. And I just wanted to come back to look at where this information has come from so that we have a picture of where it was before we get to where it ends up. So just to highlight again, on our left-hand side here, we're looking at our number of sources that we've inventoried throughout the organization. This was a shared drive location. I'll just hop over quickly. We'll take a look at what the shared drive location looked like. This is kind of typical what we're seeing. This is that mess that we're starting with, that we're currently having users kind of file to. Things are all over the place in different folders. And so this was one of our sources. We had a Google Drive and a OneDrive, and those lived in the cloud. And typically with those ones, we latched onto those as part of Windows syncing operations for those cloud environments like OneDrive and Google Drive. So here I just have my local view of my OneDrive, and there was a bunch of it during this one. We talked about some meeting minutes that are associated with land. We'll come back and look at these. And we had some OneDrive locations where we're talking about some OneDrive out there that our HR had some documents as they pertain to our employees. We had some certificates and name change and leave forms for Rick and Brian here. So that was one of our other sources. I think we reorganized those into the HR department within Whisper. We'll take a look at that in a sec. And then we also had our SharePoint sites. We had a couple of SharePoint sites that were also inventoried. We had an on-prem version. We also had on SharePoint.com version. So we can take a quick look at this. We actually brought in a bunch of information from the SharePoint Online. We also brought in some information from this test folder here on our local drive, or our local SharePoint site. We'll just kind of browse down to kind of see what we saw there. We saw a couple of things here, just a few documents from the SharePoint one. And then we can kind of move here to that middle pane is, okay, we had all our sources. We did a lot of work on reorganizing that. How does it look in our new functional? We're calling it a functional organizational structure. We kind of broke that down in this particular instance by function, department, function, and activity within those. Some people have different organizational functions with different terminology, but we'll just use this. We've been using this one for this. So we started getting our sources into our new functional organization. And then we also did some records classification. We applied some rules to find some contracts. Those contracts were set to a different content type. And then we started getting some metadata associated with those documents as well. Now, how do we actually, we've done this passively in Whisper, right? We haven't brought in any of the documents like Rick was saying. The documents are still living in all the sources. Today, we got people filing to the OneDrive. Some more HR documents came in. Maybe we're doing a resync here before we do a final one, a final migration here. So what does that process look like? How do we get now all this work that we did out to something so that we can use it going forward? We did all this cleanup. We're able to search stuff. We've got it organized so that people can find stuff easier. What does that look like? First thing I'll look at as that is right from the beginning. Let's look at that simple scenario where we had a really are going to organize shared drive. We did all this work. What does it look like now in a new organized shared drive location? So last night I actually ran all of my migrations here. I ran each one of these so we don't have to watch them run during the webinar. So we're actually going to take a quick look at one of the export profiles. Just like the electronic profiles where we specified, hey, where are we getting it from? What's the default kind of information for all that stuff coming in? We can also create export profiles. I'll just take a look at my WIM demo. For the SharePoint, or for the shared drive one, because it's just a shared drive, there's no extra metadata that we can assign to it. All we want to do is take this reorganization and put it into there. So I've actually specified where we're going to spit it out here on the other end. Pretty straightforward. Some of the other export profiles will be a little bit more complicated, things that'll have repositories and cabinets and all that. We can specify where those go later. So let's take a look at what a cleaned up shared drive looks like. So here's what I've done as an export. This was actually done last night. And we can see that our middle pane that we have in Whisper here has now been replicated out to the shared drive. A couple of quick notes here. By default, we've done a copy here. This way we can, one of the processes we often do with migrations is that we will decide that it's time to do the migration and say we lock down the shared drive so that no more changes can be done to that. Maybe over the weekend we do this migration, depending on how many documents. It could take some time. It's pretty quick here when we're going shared drive to shared drive, but I'll just drill down in here. We can see that we're starting to build out our structure that we had reorganized in Whisper now on our shared drive. So we went from that mess on the left-hand side to a clean, organized shared drive structure. We can also do this, again, let's back to our ingestion last time, or 2 times ago, where we were looking at cloud sources. Let's utilize maybe one of the OneDrives or Google Drives. Maybe we want to go back out to a OneDrive. Say that HR area got cleaned up in Whisper, and we continue to want to use OneDrive. It's a great way for us to collaborate in the cloud without having a local infrastructure for a shared drive. So I have an export here to OneDrive. And this works similar. Both these kind of work similar. If we're going out to a shared drive or a network location, these tools for the cloud sources can be utilized just to kind of throw it out to that same Windows path that then gets synced back to your OneDrive location. So I have the same thing here where I've done the export to OneDrive as well. Those are the pretty straightforward ones, but problem with these ones here is that we've kind of lost a lot of the extra information that we were doing in Whisper. things like we went out to the shared drive, but I no longer have in my shared drive here, my cleaned up shared drive location doesn't have the records functionality for saying, when is this document? So we'll drill down into forms here. What's the actual records classification we put on this? This is where we can kind of maybe use Whisper going forward. I'll talk a little bit more at the end about how we can continue to use Whisper going forward if we're going into solutions that might not be able to accommodate some of this. But just
Sorry, Troy,
my administration note here.
we lost you there for a second, Troy.
Oh, there we go. Okay, that explains why I couldn't navigate down my tree. So what I was saying is here that we put some more information on this document that's in our cleaned up shared drive, but we kind of lost it putting it out to the shared drive. So this is where we can kind of still see it within Whisper. The document still exists in my reorganizational structure here, and I can see that I've added some more information, in this case, the classification for this document. Maybe I continue going forward. At the end here, I'll talk about how we can continue to use this going forward, but this is just to highlight some of the things we might have lost going to a shared drive and how we can utilize some of this into something more robust like a SharePoint site, and then further the records functionality into Documentum will be one that we look at. Okay, so let's take a look here at a SharePoint. So the same idea here is that we've got this all cleaned up and reorganized. Let's get it out to a SharePoint site. Again, just to highlight what Rick was talking about again earlier, that passive nature. The file never actually came into Whisper. We went from our shared drive to the shared drive, or that OneDrive, and me as the user logged into this application, I needed access to both those places to be able to do this. We didn't, again, no service accounts, no special permissions or whatever. If I don't have access to go to that OneDrive, I couldn't have copied the documents in here. Same with the SharePoint site. If we go into a SharePoint site here, this is, again, my on-prem version. I'll look at my new folder 4. Here's the most recent export I did. This one, I actually just selected a subset of information. I didn't export everything. So this is just the admin forms and various that I exported here. And again, this looks very similar to exactly what we had on the shared drive. We've got our folder structure here. We can come into this and see that the document has been imported into the SharePoint site. Same with SharePoint Online. I did a full export to the SharePoint Online. This, again, this was on-prem. This is actually using our local network authentications to be able to access. The SharePoint Online, I have a SharePoint.com login that I was prompted for when I first connected to this. And again, if I didn't have permissions to get to it, I wouldn't have been able to do this export. And I actually exported to the test2 folder here. Same idea. Now, with the Whisper export, here we actually did an export of the actual content that we had. One of the other scenarios of our migration tool that comes up very often is, how do we put out new SharePoint sites? It's often that team sites are something that maybe are project-based or department-based, and they're created often. How can we use Whisper, this maybe the migration of content, but going into new SharePoint site, how could I actually use Whisper to deploy a site with a standard form of how we use our corporate structure? So for example, if I went into, let me minimize all here, we'll just go to populated. I just unchecked populated here so we can see our full functional. As I did these exports, I had the populated checked. So we only exported the structure that had content in it. But if I wanted to export the entire tree, or say we deployed a new health team site, this might be the functional organizational structure that we want in our every health site. We can actually use this to migrate the folder structure as well. And that way we get a clean site, no content, but we migrate in the folder structure as a template going forward. Just one of those side scenarios that comes up once in a while, especially around SharePoint sites because of the nature of team sites. Okay, this is one way to, I want to highlight just while we're still on SharePoint here, this is one way that we've migrated to SharePoint. A lot of implementations of SharePoint are moving towards more of metadata-driven views within it. The folder structure is not very conducive to SharePoint sites, and a lot of people like to have the metadata-driven list views and things like that when it comes to that. We've worked with multiple other SharePoint companies that have this kind of implementation. And we've actually used Whisper to integrate with other SharePoint tools like ShareGate, where we've done all the organizational structure and metadata assignments in Whisper, and then fed our export, just like we were using the reports, to say, give me a flat view of this that can be then used for other products. So our migration actually might not be directly from Whisper to these sources, but we might generate what's required for, say, another piece of software or another solution, and feed them the information they need directly. So the migration might actually be 2 steps in some cases. We won't highlight that here. We'll stay within what Whisper's doing for direct migrations. Okay, I'll keep moving along here. I want to get to some of the actual records functionality and some of this metadata that we might have gotten from our initial cleanup, and how that can be used in a more a further step up the rung here when it comes to things like information and records management. Part of this process, I'll also be going through a couple scenarios to show you and highlight some of the particular things that we've run into in our migrations and how we've solved those as well. So I don't know if many people are familiar with Documentum, but I'll just show a Documentum implementation here. Just hop over to a view. Documentum is another tier 1 solution out there that a lot of companies are using. And it's very similar to what people are used to with, you know, they call them cabinets and folders and stuff within that. And here, just to highlight here, I've done an export. I did this last night as well. This is an export of the data into an actual Documentum site. Just as a shameless plug here, well, let's actually look at some metadata first, actually, before I go into the other piece. I'm going to take a look at this document in particular. We're going to highlight this appeals accepted document under our forms and administration. So here we actually had a couple of pieces of information that were that came from our sources. From and to date are going to be a particular one we'll look at here. This, in this case, when I sync this in, this was brought from the create date and modify date. As we go into these new systems, we lose some of this information. When I went to a new shared drive, by default, we did a copy, so that then generated a new creation date on that file. We kind of lost that information. When we go into SharePoint or Documentum, the default create date for those softwares is the create date within that application. A couple of reasons why this happens. It's a couple of regulatory rules that if you want to qualify for a certain certification for software, that's one of the rules, is that your create date for your system needs to be the create date within that. Again, from best practices and records, that kind of makes sense, but that's not when the actual document was created. This one was created in 2018. So when I go into Documentum, maybe I went into SharePoint, but we're going to look at how the metadata was used in Documentum. The create date here was actually, when I imported it, created here last night at 6:25. But from my understanding, this document this isn't when it was created. We generally do what we call create legacy data fields. In this case, we're going to create a legacy create date and a legacy modified date that might drive the retention. So if in Documentum, I give it a retention period of 7 years, and it's going to be 7 years from now, but this was actually created in 2018. So I want 7 years from then. We use what we call base dates in a lot of cases. I'll scroll down here. We use base dates based on the old creation date. So here I can see when I brought this in, I actually assigned the legacy create date as that 2018 date when it was actually created on the shared drive from the source we came from. So here we passed the information along so that our export out to the new system is going to be able to use and continue to be used going forward for content that came from legacy situations. And this is very specific in this case to how long do we keep the document for, its retention period. One of the other features for a system like this is that our policies are going to be in here as well. Maybe we've created, just like in Whisper here, we've got a list of our kind of classifications, and we had retention periods associated with this. How do we get this information assigned to those documents as well? This isn't just a metadata field in other systems. This is actually going to be a policy that needs to be applied to the document as well. How do we apply those policies? Now, every system is different, and depending on what sources we're going to go to, there are different ways we can accommodate that. maybe there's some API for us to directly apply that policy. Actually, in Documentum, there's not a way for the RESTful services to apply policies directly. We actually, this is getting into a little bit of the specifics I was talking about on some of the things we faced during migrations, is that we couldn't migrate this document in here and apply a policy through the API of the RESTful services in Documentum. How did we actually accomplish that? We actually did something quite clever in my mind, is that we actually set up a retention controlled area where we could actually link this document to multiple different areas. So we linked it to the new functional structure, but that's not where they applied policies. They actually applied policies in a retention controlled area. So to highlight one of the things that's possible is we can actually link documents to multiple locations. So this appeals document, this appeals form is actually in our functional organization structure, but as a records person, I've also linked it to my retention controlled area that applied the HR01 policy. Again, just trying to highlight some of those kind of key things that we've got to think about when we're doing a migration. It's not a simple forklift of content. There's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes with these as well. Looks like Sheila might have a question there, Rick, if you want to take a look. I'll just continue with a little bit more here and then we'll come to that. So this is one thing that I wanted to highlight. Another one we can highlight too is that we've run into cases where the content coming in were actually spreadsheets. And spreadsheets were notoriously difficult to deal with because a number of clients have content that's linked between two documents. How do we've moved it from our shared drive, and in that document, we link to another document on the shared drive. If we brought that into SharePoint or Documentum, we would lose that connection. All our spreadsheets would break. How do we deal with that? So let's take a quick look at kind of what that looks like. So I'm just going to open up this spreadsheet here. Again, I'm opening it through Whisper because I have access to it. Open it here. So this is just a simple spreadsheet I put together that has some references to the other two spreadsheets for her invoices. This is some totals that were brought together, and this is bringing from the invoice spreadsheet and calculating some totals. When I brought this into any other system, if I drag and drop this in or straight import it, we lose that information. I open this spreadsheet, nothing would work. So I'm actually gonna, this is where I'm gonna do my shameless plug to my Documentum connector. This is just one of our other products, Outlook Connector for Documentum. I'm taking a look at my source within Documentum that I've imported. So under my admin forms appeals. Oh, no, sorry, that's not where we had that spreadsheet. This is actually a good exercise to see where that went. So I actually want to see this document. I know this is where it lived out on the shared drive. I'm going to take a look at, it's actually under various March 2019 in our new system. So I'm going to go into various March 2019. So this document here, if I open this up, if I just straight imported it, I would have lost the information. All these values would be reference null values that we couldn't get to. But we can actually see here in the address, we've actually updated these links to the new document we've already imported into the system. So this is actually referencing the other document we migrated into Documentum and got the piece of information that needs to go in this cell from after the migration happened. Again, I just wanted to highlight some of these. Some of this stuff is very difficult and very specific to each system. So this is kind of where some of the professional services come in. It's very difficult to account for every single possible variations of different systems. But this is the kind of thing that's, I just wanted to highlight that's possible and what we're capable of doing with having a tool like this as our platform.
Troy.
Yep.
We had a couple of questions here. One question is, if you link, are you creating a duplicate record or just providing a link to the record?
Say that again. So yeah,
if you link.
Yep.
Yeah. Which you spoke to linking.
Yep.
Are you creating a duplicate or just providing a link to the record?
Couple scenarios. So the linking functionality that I highlighted in Documentum, that isn't a duplicate. That's a feature of the Documentum system that allows you to link to multiple locations. If I wanted to do this on a shared drive, there's no way to say, like just on your C drive, if you want to put a form in one folder and in another folder, that's not something that's possible within a shared drive. That's kind of where the duplicate thing comes in. So that might be a duplicate creation. But within systems that are capable of linking to multiple locations with that single document, this is a not duplicate, and it's multiple links to the same document. So two different scenarios, and it comes down to what's possible in our destination application.
The other thing, Troy, that was commented on was whatever you name the folders in Whisper in the organization structure gets exported to the new location, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And,
so, go ahead.
So you could include classification codes, and those would end up in the folder names.
Yes. So this is actually a very common, it happens often. Organizations have their, I talked about this a little bit in past webinars, is where your organizational structure that you're building for this middle area is reflective of your classification within the organization. We have a number of clients where their last folder is HR01, and that's where they put all the HR01 documents. So there is that correlation that can happen. And that just means that your activities and your classifications would kind of line up so that they fall, when we did the export, it would fall into that HR01 document at the end. HR01 folder at the end.
Thanks, Troy.
Great. Okay, so I just want to do a recap. I talked about a couple of things here where we've moved some documents, we've copied some documents, we've done some linking, we've done a lot of, try to get people to think about some of those other things that can happen and that you need to consider when doing migrations. I highlighted a couple of the things that we've run into, things like our API doesn't allow us to apply a policy. How do we do that in our system if it's not possible through the API? Maybe we do some linking. The other one I wanted to highlight too is this idea that we're updating. We can actually have the capability of updating links within documents. This again is something that is generally lost when doing migrations, and we've had to account for this a number of times where this has come into play. The kind of getting to the end of that, then we've got stuff that's come out of the other side, and I kind of wanted to briefly touch on what might it look like going forward in a Whisper, if Whisper is continued to be used as one of the applications within an organization. Sometimes Whisper is the tool to get you from point A, our first webinar, to this case where we've got a source at the end, and that's our corporate repository going forward. That was our goal. Sometimes we need to, and that's it. Maybe that's what Whisper is intended for. That's our project. But what are some of the things that we've actually used Whisper for going forward after we've done a migration? And I won't do too much here. I don't want to ruin some of my sources and stuff like that. But I highlighted earlier where I can say, okay, I've exported to a SharePoint or exported to a shared drive. And that shared drive doesn't have a life cycle, the ability to tell me when a document's been 7 years or older or 10 years or older because I've put a policy on it. This is where we can continue to use Whisper going forward as, hey, I've exported it out. It's out there. I have an inventory of it here in Whisper. I've got all the classification stuff on it. I want to do disposition on a shared drive because I've done that. And this is, again, we looked at this in the disposition report. It says, you know what? This content still is in Whisper. It might have been moved out to the shared drive, but at any point we can say, okay, here's a document. I'm just looking at filtering by projected date as of today. I've got this Finance 03 document that's out on the drive here, and I can see that it's actually admin forms, authorizations here. And this document that lives out there, this is where it came from. This is where it came from, but I can see that this document's actually ready to go because it's met its projected date. So it could still live on the shared drive, but now we can continue to do some of that records functionality going forward. Maybe tomorrow we have this corporate repository that's been moved over. Maybe tomorrow people are going to continue to add documents to it. What does that mean? Maybe we go back to what we did earlier where let's make sure we're not creating duplicates again. Part of our cleanup was we went through and checked for some duplicates that might existed. Let's do that again on our sources to make sure that content's not being replicated again. We did all that work to clean it all up before. You know, tomorrow, let's make sure the problem doesn't persist into the future. Let's use the tools within Whisper to do that. The other quick scenario I'll mention that often happens is that we'll actually move the reorganizational structure to a source. So instead of, now we don't need to look at all these other sources, we've cleaned everything up. Let's just create a source that points to where we've migrated to. And again, since it's all cleaned up and it's all organized, it's going to come in nice and clean. We can keep it in the same folder structure. And then that's where we continue to have our sources as a Whisper content coming in and applying new classifications for content that might be created in the future. Maybe we need to create a new activity within an organization. When we do sync again, we'd see that there's a new organizational activity. Maybe we need to add that. Maybe that's something that was not intended. It's just a way for us to kind of help continue going forward to do some of that records functionality or organizational structures from an IT side or a duplicate checking. So just a kind of thought of after the fact that Whisper might not be the end, we can continue to use it for some of these tools. Maybe tomorrow we're having collaborative space where a project started and they used OneDrive and I need to move that into Whisper. Maybe they had some SharePoint or Excel documents that we needed to update the links in. Maybe after they're done the project, this would be our tool to move to the corporate repository. Often cases, things like Documentum, maybe not the most user-friendly. Again, maybe not because you're not using the Outlook connector, shameless plug, but let's keep the corporate repository as the repository and leave the collaborative spaces as our sources within Whisper. And when things are wrapped up, projects are completed, documents are no longer being used, but they're still considered records. Let's use those as our sources to continue to move content into our corporate repository. Doing all those tools and all those processes we've done just kind of on an ongoing basis rather than on a day forward basis rather than a legacy cleanup for content. So that kind of brings me to the end of the kind of migration tools. If there's any other questions, feel free to post them. Just a quick note from my end, we have further ideas for other webinars that we'll be doing in the future. I have plans to show some stuff around our database projects that we've been doing, how we can latch onto databases and use that as some of our sources, how we can map columns and metadata, or in columns and fields to objects and metadata in Whisper. And in the future, we're also looking at a new version that will be coming that's a little bit more object-oriented and a version 3 webinar RFC in the future.
Well, that's great, Troy. I know personally from my side, I know how complex a lot of these migrations get on occasion, because there may be multiple tools that you need to deal with to make things happen. So if anybody has thoughts about migration of one source to another, certainly feel free to reach out to us and talk to us about it. I just wanted to say from all of us at Western IM that I thank you all for attending the Whisper for Migration webinar today and the other ones prior to that. And I hope throughout the Whisper series you've seen what a great job it would do for assisting you and potentially you and clients if you're in the consulting business with both your physical and electronic information requirements. We hope that you'll reach out to us and talk about specific information management requirements. We're always anxious to hear about that and how Whisper and the Western IM might assist with any corporate projects that you're looking to complete. So I know in this time of uncertainty in the coronavirus days, I wish everybody to stay safe, try to work from home, be careful, and look after your families. And we at Western IM wish you all the best and have a great week. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.